Good evening. My name is Paul Larner, and I am chairman of the board of Wakefield Country Day School. This is the last in the fall series of WCDS online seminars. You can listen to recordings of previous seminars at wcdsva.org. Wakefield Country Day School is a small school of very modest means, so donations to defray the cost of these seminars and otherwise support WCDS are most welcome at the donate button on our website. Also welcome are suggestions for future seminar topics and speakers, as we hope to continue this program in the spring or winter of next year. This evening, I will be speaking to John McCaslin, editor and reporter of Rappahannock News. As such, John is often the first to learn of significant news events, and since he is on the front line of news events, he has the privilege of a special and uniquely informed insight about events in our community. Like many in the WCDS community, John has a diverse and intriguing background, having been a White House correspondent, guest on multiple TV shows, and sponsor of his own, as well as a travel writer. Please submit all questions via chat, and I will present them during or at the end of the interview. John, welcome to the Wakefield series. Perhaps I could begin by asking, how did you decide to get into journalism?
I think it probably, in fact, I wrote about that. I've been fortunate enough to be the author of a couple books, and one surrounded specifically my journalism experiences. And I credit my next door neighbor as a young boy in Old Town Alexandria, who would tell me when I was 10, 11, 12 years old that I would be a reporter one day. And I just gave her eulogy about a year ago, as a matter of fact, but I would always be on my bicycle. Old Town, of course, has all the houses crammed together for many square blocks, and it's there's always news to report. And I would go to every fire, I would go to every shooting, and I would come back and be the purveyor of news on my block. And in college, I continued actually in high school. I wrote for the newspaper. In college, I wrote a little bit for the newspaper and had a couple memorable interviews during that period. And it was after college. It was during college I went into speech communications with a concentration in journalism, and ended up going right into broadcasting after broadcast news after my graduation.
What do you think is the most important characteristic to make a good journalist? Do you have to be have an investigative mindset? Have to be an extremely social person? Politically aware?
I think all of those, Paul, are very important. I know that when editors would be looking for a good reporter, they would look not so much at a journalism degree, but depending what beat they might want covered. If you have a law background, as many of the TV journalists do, you know, you're a perfect person to comment on the Supreme Court or the other federal courts and other legal issues. It's obviously a very litigious society. History majors are great journalists because no matter what you write, you can always hark back to what happened in previous times and compare it to what is taking place today. And subconsciously, I think we do that all the time as we write, whether it's recent history or further back. Of course, having a grasp of writing, if you're going to go into broadcast, it doesn't hurt to have the gift for gab. And I think despite the changing faces of journalism today that we've been experiencing over the last 20 years with the advent of the computers and the internet, I think that there's still very valuable positions for young people to fill. And I know we have a lot of students here tonight on this Zoom call. And if they're interested in writing, interested in journalism, I hope they pursue it, because there's some great avenues there that can lead to other places as well.
So given your interest as early as high school in journalism and then later in college, where was your first job?
My first job was in Kalispell, Montana. You know, we had an intern from Wakefield Country Day School, Monica Marciano, a few years ago, a terrific writer and person. And I know she's going to be going places. In fact, she's already gone places. And it was a pleasure to work with her. And, you know, when it was my era of college, which was back in the 1970s, we didn't have the internships that are offered today by so many groups and newspapers and what have you. And I had some contacts. I think there was an opportunity very low level in Pittsburgh, and I think there was one in St. Louis. And I thought, why go there when my mother was from the most beautiful part of the United States, which is Northwest Montana, specifically Kalispell. And I went there for probably the best 4 years of my life, from 1980 to 84. And I worked in radio news and worked for a weekly newspaper, as I'm doing now. Of course, it was different then. We weren't online then. We didn't even know what a computer was. Had no idea what changes that would bring to the journalism profession. But other than the online, it was very similar to what I'm doing today.
All right. Well, I'm sure you've got 4 more excellent years in front of you, but tell us how it is that you went from Kalispell, Montana to the White House.
Well, I call it the largest undeserved leap in journalism. You know, I was fortunate in my 4 years there. I also worked for UPI, so a lot of my stories went national. Some were local stories. I think we had, oh gosh, anywhere from 4 to 6 grizzly bear fatality maulings while I was there that ended up as fatalities. Of course, people I don't want to say like reading that sort of thing, but they do. They gobble it up, no pun intended. And so I realized just how easy it was to have a national byline. And I knew a journalist in Washington who worked for the Washington Star for several decades, Jerry O'Leary, who was my mentor. And Jerry covered the White House for the Star. He covered Capitol Hill. He was their foreign correspondent, followed Henry Kissinger around. It was Jerry that explained to me what Watergate was all about back when I was in high school. And I ran into Jerry in Great Falls, Montana, of all places, when Ronald Reagan was there running for re-election in 1984. I was there for UPI. I was there for for B Broadcasting at the time. And Jerry and I met there in the Coliseum in Great Falls, and he did me a wonderful favor that day. He led me back stage, and I had an interview with James Baker, who would become the chief of staff. He was Treasury Secretary as well under Reagan. Larry Speakes was the press secretary. And fast forward, I came back to Washington. Jerry had a heart attack and needed somebody as his number 2. And I took that undeserved leap from Whitefish to the White House. Talk about being overwhelmed. But really, and this is important for all journalists today that are in small communities, such as Kalispell, Montana, which today has blossomed, it's grown so much. But covering a county government, covering a city hall is no different than covering the White House. In fact, it's easier to cover the White House because every word that is uttered by the president or any of his aides is immediately transcribed and sent today to your computer within minutes. Back in those days, it was on paper and distributed within minutes. You didn't really need a tape recorder or anything. You could write notes, take notes of what you thought were the most important parts that the president said, knowing that that exact quote would be coming to you on paper in no time. Today, I transcribe all day long. Back then, you transcribed all day long. It's a luxury. So covering the nation's capital is not, it's a great pinnacle to climb, but it's not as difficult as some people might think it is.
So, John, we see in the daily press briefings this cramped quarters press room in the White House, and there are maybe somewhere between 20 and 30 reporters that appear that can fit in there. Can you explain to the audience the difference between being a White House reporter and a White House correspondent?
Yes, and I don't think it's changed much. The White House correspondents are assigned a chair, and there's probably a long waiting list, but the briefing room that you see in the West Wing has so many seats. It's like a little movie theater, and everybody's assigned a chair that is there full time. If you have 2 correspondents or 3 correspondents, such as a network or a larger newspaper, you have 1 seat and you will share it. Maybe you're going to work the later shift than your colleague. Those are your White House correspondents, and some of those seats sit vacant as well. There's a lot of people that are accredited with White House credentials to have access to the White House. You'll see them lined up on the walls. They can come and go. They might not be there all day. When you're a White House correspondent for, say Peter Baker for the New York Times, you're there constantly covering it. That's your main beat. You can be the chief White House correspondent or people under you. You also have a desk. We were assigned, my colleague and I had 2 desks in the basement of the White House, right directly underneath. What you see there when you look in the White House briefing room, when President Trump comes out and speaks to the reporters periodically, or his press secretary, that is actually over a swimming pool that was put in by one of the previous presidents. And I think it was Jimmy Carter, I don't remember specifically, that put wooden boards over that and put the White House briefing room right on top of it. To where the pipes and the filters are for the pool is where the basement of the White House is. And that's where everybody in my day, CNN was there, we were there, a lot of the radio networks, the Associated Press radio was down there. So they do, as you point out, Paul, shove everybody in.
Right. Now, the credentials to be a White House correspondent, I would imagine those credentials are granted to an actual publication rather than an individual. Is that correct?
Yeah, you better have a good, somebody that basically wants you assigned to the White House. A lot of people that wish they could have accreditation are not granted it. You have the White House Correspondents Association, which oversees it. The Secret Service oversees it. And you go into what next door is called the Old Executive Office Building, and they will alert you whether you qualify or not. Not everybody can be accredited by the White House. And most importantly, you undergo a tremendous background check. I'm sure many people, several probably on this Zoom conference, have been notified by somebody from the US government to speak on behalf of somebody that's nominated for a certain position or perhaps security clearance. And that's what happens as a reporter. They contact people that you know in your life that you have no idea they're even contacting, just to find out a little bit more about you, which is part of the process.
Right. Now, when you were at the White House, did you travel at times with the pool of White House reporters selected to travel with the president?
Yes, the White House pool, and that's another thing. To be involved in the White House pool, you have to be a full-time accredited White House correspondent, and that goes alphabetically. So probably back in the 80s when I covered Reagan full-time, probably about every 3 weeks, that day you had to stick by the president's side until a lid was called in the evening. And a lid meant you could go home. The president was not going to leave the White House. Same thing happened, the White House pool reporting on presidential trips. Whether you were a pool reporter that day or not, you would still travel with the president, out of town, out of the country, or wherever they were going. I've spent many a long with Reagan when he would go out there and celebrate New Year's. and many other places. You'd sit out in cars or on the sidewalk in Georgetown if they were having dinner inside. You could go in for a brief minute, take a picture of them, and then you had to get out. So you were always within distance of them, and you always had a camera crew with you as well. A lot of times we didn't know where we were going. I got a call one Saturday. I was the pool reporter on a Saturday. Nancy Reagan, it turned out, wanted to take a nice trip one day. It was a beautiful sunny spring day. And I was told be at the Pentagon landing pad within an hour, and got there. They don't tell you where you're going. We had no idea. You get on board a helicopter. I remember I was with a colleague from the Associated Press, and we're looking out the window of the helicopter trying to figure out where we're going. And being a native of Virginia, and he was not, I had various clues, and I said, hey, we're heading out towards what looks like Middleburg. Maybe we're going to go to the Annenberg estate, which is the same people he would meet with in Palm Springs for New Year's. And then finally, the next thing you know, we're flying over the rotunda of Monticello. And we landed on the lawn of Monticello. The presidential helicopter comes down a short time after that, because you have to be on the ground. God forbid anything happens to that helicopter, you have to witness it. There was one fire truck from Charlottesville there. They were not told why they were there. And then the only other people that knew they were there were the head of the museum, his wife, and their daughter. And it was an incredible experience for me because Ron and Nancy Reagan climbed off the helicopter with Michael Deaver, then the chief of staff. And being the pool reporter, it was a very tight pool. I walked in with the president through these French doors into an existing tour, which is what they wanted to do for political purposes, given it was campaign season. And it was just, you can imagine the 15 people in the tour group to suddenly have Ronald Reagan, who was bigger than life, big cowboy, John Wayne type guy, walk through the door. And I'll never forget the African-American who amazingly was dressed in a red, white, and blue jogging outfit. It looked like the American flag. It couldn't have been a better photo op for the president. And I put his quote in the pool report, and I won't say his first two words, but it was blank, blank, where the hell did you come from? And you couldn't have gotten a better soundbite when you're running for re-election. Of course, he did win re-election. But those were some incredible memories for me as a young correspondent. And for you guys and gals who are watching today, I was, depending what grade you're on, I was anywhere from 12 years older than you are now to maybe 15 years older. So, your time's coming, and pursue it, because you can go many places.
So John, just to close the loop a little bit on your biography, because there are numerous subjects I want to cover with you. How did you come to Rappahannock County from the White House?
Well, I actually, I did not cover the White House full time into the late 80s. I had several other beats. I covered the Nicaraguan War on both sides, both the Sandinista side and both on the Contra side. When you went in to be with the Contras, you had to fly in through Honduras on helicopters. When you were a guest of the Sandinistas, which were backed by the Soviet Union in those days, you were in Managua in a hotel. I did that for several years. It was an incredible time. Covered Capitol Hill, and then I went into column writing for nearly 20 years. Had a daily syndicated political column through the Washington Times, syndicated by the Los Angeles Times, and later the Chicago Tribune. And that was the longest beat I ever had, and the most enjoyable, which really got me into the insides of Washington. And then I was anchor of a show called America's Morning News until 2014. Went up to the New York area to help with a new startup, a digital news startup, which is more of the trend of journalism today, which I did for a couple years. And an opportunity came up while I was there, for those of you in Rappahannock County, and I used to come out here as a kid all the time. We had friends in Harris Hollow from a very young age, so I knew the area well. I knew how special Rappahannock County was. From my time spent in Montana, this is as close as you can get to Montana anywhere on the East Coast. And now I'll go so far as to say, in many places it surpasses Montana, given the explosion of population there that has happened, especially since COVID, but well before that. It's sad to see there's no zoning there, restrictions there like we have here, and that's an entire other story. But the Kramer building, as it's called, the old IGA in Little Washington, Virginia, came up for sale back in 2014, 2015. And my future business partner, who has a house near Culpeper, said, would you be interested in going in on it with me? And I'd been in journalism almost 40 years at that point, and I look forward to taking a break. And that's how I got here. I had purchased a house actually 5 years before that, 10 years ago in Woodville. So I was coming down as often as possible when I was doing the America's Morning News show, and knew how much I loved it. Got into the restaurant business for 2 years, then walked down the hill 20 feet behind the Kramer building and became editor of the Rappahannock News, which I never expected to do. 4 years ago this January, and it's been full circle. And I say this with all due respect to everybody I work with. It's the hardest I've ever worked in my life. So you can have a very challenging career even in Rappahannock County, Virginia.
Right. So along those lines, let me ask you just a sample story that comes into your desk and how you track it down and produce an article about it. So, the example that comes to mind is a couple of months ago, there was a small private plane that crashed on the slopes of the Shenandoah National Park. How did you hear about the story? What did you do next? Tell us how it becomes written on the newspaper.
Well, it's interesting you selected that story because we kind of had a run-in with Shenandoah National Park. I've been trying to help Shenandoah Park in terms of communication with the media. Glacier National Park in Montana, which I basically covered that every day when I lived there, and still have close contacts there that work for the Park Service, the National Park Service. Yosemite, Yellowstone Park, they issue news releases every day. They have somebody that does that, and that's been a problem in Shenandoah. There has been somebody who juggles several jobs, and I completely respect her because, again, she wears many hats. But there's stories like that. We had, unfortunately, and perhaps some of the people on the Zoom call today knew this young man, but a Fauquier County High School student who fell over White Oak Canyon Falls a few months before that, this past summer, and passed away. None of that was ever reported by Shenandoah Park. I found out from the mother of a student who knew him, who lived in Sperryville, 2 weeks or so after the fact. And that's unacceptable when something like this happens. And his buddy, they had just graduated this summer from Fauquier High School. His buddy also fell. And we ultimately tracked down the story, and there was a lot of back and forth between the National Park Service and the Rappahannock News as to what the public has a right to know and what we should be told for our readership. And we wrote that story. Similar with the plane crash, they would not allow us access to the plane crash site. I understand that. We would not have gotten in a way. I'm on that trail almost every day with my dog. We know how to stand back. So there's things that are being worked out. We have a new Park Service superintendent, a new Shenandoah superintendent who arrived from Yellowstone in the last couple of weeks, and he's going to make some much needed changes. But that's an interesting story, Paul, because not only did we have difficulty in reporting it, but you never know who that person could be that was on that airplane. 2 weeks ago, we had several people injured on Old Rag. You never know, given our proximity to the nation's capital, who that person might have been. And these are reasons we have to report this. We maybe don't have to put their name in, but you never know if for whatever reason somebody wanted to keep that quiet. So the plane crash turned out to be a fascinating story, a very tragic story. And we reported on it right up until a couple weeks ago when the NTSB and FAA released their initial report on the investigation. It was a fascinating gentleman who was the pilot. And these are all human interest stories. that we hope people enjoy being able to read.
Right. So, John, before I go to the questions in the queue, I'm just would ask you to advise our students and other youngsters who may be on the call. What's the most important characteristics that you need, in your opinion, to succeed in journalism as a career?
Just
What should our
always tell the
students be
truth.
thinking?
Always tell the truth. And if you tell the truth, everything will come together. You know, we can get into a long discussion now or any other time. I've talked to many groups of students over the years, high school, college, even grade school. And this is my first Zoom conference, and hopefully we can put COVID-19 behind us. I know it's impacted WCDS as much as it has RCES and Rappahannock County High School. It's impacted everybody, and hopefully one day I can come back to your school and we can talk in person. There's new terms suddenly, fake news, things like that. But if you're telling the truth, it's not fake news. If you've witnessed it, it's not fake news. But ethics is very important. Always tell the truth, follow the ethical line. Journalism 101, if some of you want to take your first journalism class in college, I recommend it, whether you're interested in journalism or not. Journalism 101, and you're going to learn what it takes to be a reporter. But I think most of you have that ingrained already. You've received it from your parents. And those are the morals and the values that you need, not only in journalism, but other professions. And ours is very similar to those.
Okay, John, let me go to some questions. First question is, in recent years, there have been claims that some interviewers and journalists bias their findings to align with their opinions rather than presenting only facts that describe all sides of an issue. Do you find these claims true?
There's something you have to distinguish here. And it's more difficult, I think, for young people today, the younger generations who have grown up with so much technology and media and information overload 24/7. And it's coming at you from legitimate news sources. It's coming at you from websites, from blogs. And there's thousands of them out there, obviously. What you have to remember, everybody, is just specifically with regard to what we look at as journalism today. When you look at Fox News, when you look at MSNBC, when you look at CNN, and you see these commentators, especially primetime, from 7 o'clock on, you get away from the news anchors, and they come back in the morning on these channels as well. They're opinion makers. They are almost pundits. They're there because they know who their audience is. Fox News caters to a conservative audience. MSNBC caters to a left-leaning audience, a liberal audience. CNN is trying to be somewhere in the middle, but at night, they have the same thing as the other networks, whether it's Sean Hannity, whether it's Chris Cuomo. You know, their political stripes come out. They don't try to hide them. So often, without digressing any further on that, these are not journalists. Maybe they were reporters at one time. Chris Cuomo used to work for ABC. That's not his role anymore. He's crossed that line. If you're going to be a newspaper person, you cannot cross that line if you're going to be a reporter. And that's why we don't have bumper stickers on our cars for any candidates. That's why we don't contribute even $1 to any presidential campaign or a local person running for Congress. You can't do that. And because once you do that, you lose your credibility as a journalist. So do not confuse the people you see on these television networks, these cable networks, with somebody that works for a legitimate newspaper that is in the trenches, as I say, day in and day out, bringing the news to their subscribers and readership, without the fanfare that these celebrity talkers have that are on these cable channels. And whenever I went on Hardball with Chris Matthews, which I did very often, or Fox and Friends, which I did very often, you were always very careful. You'd be asked by their anchors or panelists or whatever you want to call them. Show hosts is what they are. They're hosts. Again, they're celebrities for the most part. Well, how do you feel about this? Well, you stop right there and you don't tell them how you feel about it. We all have our own opinions, but we got to be very careful about it. I know a lot of journalists that don't even vote, but you have to stop them right there. And you can say, well, I can tell you how the Republicans feel about it, and I can tell you how the Democrats feel about it, but you're not going to find out how I feel about it, because if that happens, then you might as well go from being a newspaper reporter to being one of these celebrity talking heads.
All right. So, John, before I go to the next question, I have one of my own, and that is in the pundit class, as you've kind of described it, that show up 2, 3, 4 times a day on CNN or Fox or MSNBC, and they're introduced as I forget the terminology they use, but are those people highly paid? Take a guy like Sanjay Gupta. Okay, he's the health correspondent for CNN. Is he making an absolute fortune doing this, or does he do it for nothing just to build up his profile for other purposes?
Sanjay Gupta is actually a member of CNN, an employee of CNN, but I know where you're going with that. A lot of people that come on, he's a regular and he is employed by CNN and he makes a very good salary. There's other people that come on board. Maybe they're a former congressional flack or chief of staff on Capitol Hill, or they work for one of the Republican PACs or Democratic PACs. They are coming on to promote whatever position they want to promote. Then you have contributors, somebody that will come on every so often when called upon, and they make a decent little salary. They make more than grocery money to appear. So you do. That's a very good point. You have to distinguish between who their staff is, who their lineup is, their paid lineup that work for CNN, like a Sanjay Gupta, like an Anderson Cooper,
Right.
Even more than him, and then somebody that comes on as a paid contributor, and you will see that there below their name that they're a contributor. You can be sure they're paid for that network to have the opportunity to say that. It's almost as if we own you. And then somebody like you or I could go on. You could go on and talk about certain needs for education today, and you would be there for that reason. And I think about the most you'd get is a cup of coffee.
and my opinion might not be worth that. So another quick curiosity question, the news anchors have an earpiece, and at times they're kind of in pause mode because it appears that somebody's talking to them through their earpiece, and at times they refer to it as the control room. So when Brian Williams or Sean Hannity is interviewing someone, are they reading questions or are they just stating questions that come to them from the control room? Or are these their own questions that are impromptu, or do they have them written out in a teleprompter and are reading the questions?
I've been in that hot seat before where you're interviewing somebody and then in your earpiece, you will get a suggestion from the producers. They're called producers, and there's several of them for various shows. Even a reporter will have 1 or 2 producers that will go around the country with them or to various stories in Washington, D.C. So often you'll find the producer arm in arm with the reporter or the correspondent in this case. And sometimes during an interview, if those producers are sitting in the back and they're watching the interview and they think, well, gee, they ought to be asking the person this, they will say something in their ear. One of the best scoops I ever got along those lines, Paul, has to do with Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia, who is a pollster. You often hear him. You've heard him for decades now. weighing in on elections. I know UVA picked Cameron Webb to win in the recent 5th District congressional race we had here, along with the Cook Political Report. At least they called it a toss-up, but at some point, Cameron was actually up 1 or 2 points. Again, another story we could talk about at length, but back during when Oliver North was running for Senate in Virginia, there was a debate, and Larry Sabato, I discovered through a very good source, and I actually knew the CNN producer that he was talking to, but he was actually feeding questions to this producer at CNN, who was then talking into the earpiece of one of the CNN moderator anchors who was conducting the debate. And it was very embarrassing for Larry. I actually put that little story in my book. And you can't do that. Not Larry Sabato. A producer can do it and get away with it. But to answer your question, specific question, yes, very often they're being alerted to something that guest said that they might not have heard, or it didn't resonate, and they suggest something like, hey Jim, ask him about this or ask him about that, and that's what they're listening to, or that it's time to go to a commercial. That happens all the time too.
Right. Let me go to my next question, which in large part I think you've answered, but perhaps you'll have some additional thoughts. The question is, what advice do you have for someone who wants to start a career in journalism?
Well, it never hurts to reach out to people that are in the industry, no matter what it is. You know, if you want to go into banking, reach out to Mike Leake or Jason Brady here in Rappahannock County. If you want to go into journalism, you reach out to me or any of the reporters that I work with. We have several: Patty Hardy, Rachel Needham. We have Foothills Forum, which just in a few words, Foothills Forum is here to support local journalism. It's a nonprofit 501. And we've got a big special that they write about tomorrow in the newspaper. One of their correspondents who writes about businesses here in Rappahannock County, as you'll read tomorrow, that kind of weaves in with the environment. It's an amazing piece. So there's plenty of people right here in Rappahannock County to talk to. Monica Marciano, I brought her up before, did a tremendous job as an intern for the Rappahannock News. We would welcome anybody that would like to come down to the newsroom. Wednesday, we proof paper, sheets of each page of the newspaper. Come on down, grab a sheet, go upstairs and look for typos, because we have too many of them, especially with my aging eyes. So, come down and talk to us. We'll help any way we can. There's obviously other newspapers in Fauquier. Fortunately, we're in an area that still has local news. A lot of unfortunate environments that go out to West Virginia, a lot of the coal country out there, they don't have newspapers anymore. And they're called news deserts. And that's one of the tragedies of the demise of local news in this economy. It's very difficult these days. There's not a huge profit margin for any owner of a weekly newspaper or a daily newspaper, which is why hundreds close every year. So come and talk to us. We'd be happy to give you some pointers, but that's what I would do. Reach out to people that are in the profession now, sit down and talk to them, have a cup of coffee, speak to your guidance counselors in school, people like Suzanne. My gosh, you guys have a great story in our paper tomorrow that Suzanne wrote with a wonderful photograph. So talk to your teachers, talk to your counselors. When you get in college, stick very close to your guidance counselor, and it will work out.
All right. Well, that's great to hear that they can come down and proofread the paper and get a start right here in Rappahannock County. And thanks for mentioning Marcia. She's one of our prize graduates. Several weeks ago, a group of us visited her on the range at UVA, where she must be doing very well. Let me go to some additional questions I have received. how does Foothills Forum fit into this scheme? And I think that's intended to be generally the Rappahannock County's environment.
Yeah, well, Foothills Forum, if you wanted to go online and read about Foothills Forum, basically it's what the bottom line is, they support local journalism, and there's several nonprofit groups like Foothills Forum in other counties. Fauquier County has one. Many of its members, founders, board members today in Fauquier from the Washington Post. Andy Alexander, who is with the Foothills Forum here in Rappahannock County, is the former ombudsman of the Washington Post. You know, Bud Meyer, journalist with tremendous roots from the Miami Herald, is here, works with Foothills Forum, carries much of the weight of this group. Randy Ryland, whose byline you read often in our paper, Smithsonian Magazine writer. Sarah Schoenhart, who many people in the county know from her time here. She's in Washington, D.C. with a full-time journalism job. She's still down here almost every weekend, and you see her byline in the paper, former Wall Street Journal Asia correspondent. We have a tremendous caliber of talent in this county, whether it's former journalists, current journalists who are down here on weekends, or in other sectors. You've got Bill Webster, the former CIA director and FBI director here. I just had a story about Mrs. Brainerd, who's got a farm on Piedmont Avenue, who's the #1 choice, or so we're led to believe, by Joe Biden to become our next Treasury Secretary. We can go on and on. There's National Geographic writer here. Just a tremendous wealth of talent, and they're all interested in helping whatever industry they worked in previously. We're fortunate to have these journalists who, again, are working for a nonprofit, who are supporting the Rappahannock News in the interest of the readership. Don't forget that poll they did, which has been, I guess, about 5 years ago now. They did that with UVA. And I think 43%, if I remember the figure correctly, 43% of the households in Rappahannock County responded to this survey, which is amazing. And the bottom line, you know, that they asked her, what are the most important issues to you in this county? And it was tremendous to find out how so many residents of Rappahannock County feel about not only where they live, but what they know that they need. The #1 issue 5 years ago that is still, in my opinion, especially in light of COVID and what is happening with students today, is internet, broadband, and cell coverage. And that's what people wanted. Of course, that's very expensive to bring, you know, fiber cable, fiber optic, what have you, fiber cable. But to get into 42, 43, 44% of households, hats off to Foothills Forum for that. And there are many other things that the environment, jobs in this rural economy of ours. There's so few jobs here. The schools, we have a drop in the student body that is scary to look at in our public schools right now, and indeed some private schools. And a rapidly growing elderly population in this county. So it goes back to jobs in the rural economy. What are the answers here? And these are issues that, you know, you talk about the White House, and I told you how your county supervisors are no different than your cabinet at the White House. That's why we cover all these meetings on Courthouse Row on Gay Street in Washington. They're very important because it's up to our elected supervisors to study these issues. And right now they're working on the comprehensive plan, for instance, and that's looking at where growth can take place. They're updating that plan. Where can it take place? Is it in the village of Sperryville? Yes, there's an area there that can grow. Same with the town of Washington. At the same time, preserving the view sheds, which is another thing that the 42% replied was very important to them. Of course, that's what makes this county so special. You know, it's amazing. I wrote about COVID this morning, and I'm sure it's still online. I think I put it in the paper tomorrow in the Rap page. But, you know, it boggles my mind that Rappahannock County is as beautiful a place as it is. It looks no different. In fact, it's somewhat more rural than it was 200 years ago. And yet we are 40 miles from the Rappahannock County line near Amosville to the Capitol Beltway. We are 57 miles from the courthouse on Gay Street in Washington to the to the nation's capital Beltway. And so what is happening, what has happened here over the years, the supervisors, the town council members have all realized what a special place Rappahannock County is, and it is. I've been everywhere, and this is an amazing place to be this geographically close to the nation's capital, yet to preserve the character that we have. Hats off to everybody. And I think that's what everybody wants to continue to do. But at the same time, to survive, there has to be some avenues for economic growth. And that's what they need to figure out right now.
Well, John, I have a number of thoughts on that, but we're getting a little long into the night. Our Wakefield students have got, you know, at least an hour or more of homework in front of them since we work up pretty hard. So I want to thank you for taking the time and describing your career in journalism and offering the opportunity for some of our students, if they're interested, to come down and learn a great deal more about it at Rap News. So thanks again, and I'll look forward to staying in touch with you on Rappahannock events.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and come on down and see me, everybody. Look forward to it.
All right, you may be swamped.
Good.
Take care.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Be swamped with helpers.